Before we dive into this incredible journey of redemption and self-discovery, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Now, let's begin. The conference room felt smaller with every passing second. Dalton Ashford stood frozen at the front, his hands trembling slightly as he stared at the faces that had once looked at him with anticipation. Now, there was only disappointment. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice barely audible. I don't have it ready." The presentation he'd promised for 6 months, the one that would finally prove he still had what it took, was nowhere near complete. His laptop screen glowed with half-finished slides and notes that made no sense even to him. One by one, people gathered their belongings. Chairs scraped against the floor. Whispers filled the air. Nobody met his eyes as they filed out. The heavy door closed with a final, devastating click, leaving Dalton alone in the suffocating silence. He slumped into the nearest chair, his head falling into his hands. How had it come to this? He used to be somebody. People used to believe in him. Now, he couldn't even keep a simple promise. His phone buzzed with messages he couldn't bring himself to read. Probably more people canceling meetings, withdrawing support, giving up on him. He'd become an expert at letting people down. Dalton began collecting his scattered papers, shoving them carelessly into his worn briefcase. As he reached for the last folder, something slipped out and fluttered to the floor. A photograph yellowed with age. He picked it up carefully. In the picture, a younger version of himself beamed at the camera, holding a trophy high above his head. Standing beside him was Mirabelle, his best friend, her smile as bright as his. And there in the background was Sterling, his mentor, looking proud. 15 years. It had been 15 years since that photograph was taken. 15 years since he'd felt that kind of pure, uncomplicated joy. Dalton traced the edges of the photo with his thumb, feeling the weight of all those lost years pressing down on his chest. What had happened to that young man full of dreams? Where had all that promise gone? As he placed the photograph back into his briefcase, something else caught his attention. A corner of cream-colored paper peeking out from the side pocket. A pocket he never used. Frowning, he pulled it out. It was an envelope. Expensive paper sealed with red wax that had cracked with age. His name was written across the front in Sterling's distinctive handwriting, but that was impossible. He would have remembered receiving something like this. Dalton turned the envelope over in his hands. The postmark was faded, but he could just make out the date. 15 years ago. The same year as the photograph. The same year everything had been perfect. His heart began to race as he ran his finger under the seal. Why had Sterling given this to him? And more importantly, why had he never opened it? The wax crumbled as he carefully broke the seal, but just as he began to lift the flap, his phone rang sharply, making him jump. The envelope slipped from his hands, sliding under the conference table. It was his landlord. Dalton's stomach dropped. He already knew what this call would be about. The call from his landlord could wait. Right now, Dalton needed to remember when things were different. When he was different. He retrieved the envelope from under the table and slipped it carefully into his jacket pocket. Something told him this wasn't the right moment to read it. Not here, in this room that still smelled of his failure. As Dalton walked through the empty parking lot toward his aging car, his mind drifted backward through the years, pulling him into a memory he'd tried so hard to forget. 15 years ago, the world had been full of possibility. 22-year-old Dalton had just won the National Innovation Prize, a competition that drew the brightest young minds from across the country. His invention, a device that could purify water using solar power and recycled materials, had beaten out hundreds of other entries. The auditorium had erupted in applause as his name was announced. Dalton remembered walking onto that stage, his legs shaking with excitement and disbelief. The trophy was heavier than he'd expected, solid and real in his hands. "You did it!" Mirabelle had tackled him with a hug the moment he came backstage, nearly knocking the trophy from his grip. Her dark eyes sparkled with tears of joy. "I knew you would. I always knew." They'd been friends since childhood, growing up on the same street, building makeshift inventions in her garage. Mirabelle had believed in him even when he didn't believe in himself. "This is just the beginning," Dalton had told her, his voice brimming with confidence. "This is going to change everything." And he'd truly believed it. At 22, the future stretched out before him like an endless highway. and he was certain he knew exactly where it led. Sterling had approached him at the reception afterward. His mentor was a tall man with silver hair and kind eyes that seemed to see right through people. "Congratulations, Dalton," Sterling had said, shaking his hand firmly. "You've earned this. I couldn't have done it without your guidance, sir." Sterling had smiled, but there was something serious in his expression. He'd reached into his jacket and pulled out a cream-colored envelope sealed with red wax. "I want you to keep this," Sterling had said, pressing it into Dalton's palm. "Don't open it now. In fact, don't open it until you feel truly lost. Until you think you've forgotten who you are and why you started this journey." Dalton had laughed, the sound easy and carefree. "That's never going to happen. I know exactly who I am and where I'm going." "Keep it anyway," Sterling had insisted, his voice gentle but firm. "As insurance, promise me you'll keep it safe." "I promise," Dalton had agreed, tucking the envelope into his jacket pocket without a second thought. He'd been so sure he'd never need it. The reception had continued late into the night. Dalton remembered the champagne, the congratulations, the business cards pressed into his hands. Representatives from major companies, investors, journalists, everyone wanted to talk to him, to be associated with his success. "This is your moment," Mirabelle had whispered to him at one point. "Enjoy it." And he had enjoyed it. Every single second of it. Now, sitting in his car in the present day, Dalton reached into his pocket and felt the envelope's weight. 15 years it had been with him, forgotten in that unused pocket of his old briefcase, waiting. His phone buzzed again. The landlord. Reality crashed back over him like a cold wave. Dalton finally answered the phone. His landlord's voice was stern but not unkind. He had 3 days to pay 2 months of overdue rent, or he'd have to leave. Dalton promised he'd find a way, knowing he had no idea how. 2 years after winning that prize, life had still felt full of promise. Dalton's small apartment was decorated with framed articles about his achievement. His water purification device had been featured in several magazines, and people were starting to know his name. He'd been working on improving his invention, making it more efficient, more affordable. His dream was to see it used in communities that desperately needed clean water. Every night he sketched new designs, filled notebooks with calculations, imagined the faces of people whose lives he'd change. Then came the letter that would alter everything. Dalton remembered opening his mailbox and finding the thick, expensive envelope. Inside was an offer from Meridian Tech Corporation, one of the largest technology companies in the country. They wanted him. Not his invention, him. The salary they offered was staggering, more money than he'd ever imagined making. The position was Senior Innovation Consultant, which sounded impressive and important. They promised resources, connections, and a fast track to becoming a household name in the tech world. "This is incredible," he'd shouted, bursting into Mirabelle's small art studio where she worked on her paintings. "Look at this." Mirabelle had read the letter carefully, her expression growing more concerned with each line. "Dalton, what about your water purification project? I can work on it there. They have laboratories, funding, everything I need. But that's not what this job is," she'd said gently, pointing to a paragraph. "You'd be consulting on their products, corporate technology. This doesn't mention anything about humanitarian work." "I can do both," Dalton had insisted, already imagining himself in a corner office. "Once I'm established there, once I have their resources and their name behind me, I'll have so much more power to make my project succeed." Mirabelle had set the letter down and looked at him with those knowing eyes. "Just be careful, Dalton. Remember why you started. Remember what matters." "I'm not forgetting anything," he'd said, feeling a flash of irritation. "I'm being smart. You can't change the world from a tiny apartment with limited resources. Sometimes you have to play the game first." He'd called Sterling that evening, expecting his mentor to share his excitement. Instead, Sterling had been quiet for a long moment. "Have you read the entire contract?" Sterling had finally asked. "Not yet. They're sending the full paperwork next week. Read it carefully, Dalton. Every word. Companies like Meridian don't make generous offers without protecting their interests. You don't think I can handle this?" "I think you're brilliant," Sterling had replied. "I just want you to go into this with your eyes open. Don't let ambition blind you to the details." But Dalton had already made up his mind. The following week, the contract arrived, 40 pages of dense legal language. He'd started reading it, gotten through the first 10 pages, but his eyes had glazed over at all the technical terms. The salary section was clear enough. The benefits were outstanding. That was what mattered, wasn't it? He'd signed it at a celebratory dinner Meridian Tech had arranged at an expensive restaurant. Champagne flowed. His new colleagues welcomed him warmly. They presented him with a signing bonus check that made his hands shake. Mirabelle hadn't come to the dinner, claiming she had a gallery opening to attend. Dalton had been too caught up in the excitement to notice her absence much. At the end of the evening, as he'd tucked the contract copy into his bag, he'd noticed a clause printed in smaller text near the back. Something about intellectual property rights. He'd meant to ask about it, but had gotten distracted by another round of congratulations. "I'll look at it tomorrow," he'd thought. "I'm sure it's standard." Now, sitting in his car in the present, Dalton closed his eyes. That contract had been the first crack in the foundation. He just hadn't seen it yet. 3 years into his position at Meridian Tech, Dalton barely recognized his own life. His days blurred together in an endless cycle of meetings, presentations, and projects that meant nothing to him. He consulted on smart home devices, entertainment systems, and luxury gadgets for people who already had everything. Every product was designed to maximize profit, not to solve real problems. The corner office he'd imagined never materialized. Instead, he shared a cramped cubicle with 2 other consultants who seemed just as miserable as he felt. His apartment had improved. He could afford a nicer place now, but it felt empty. The framed articles about his water purification invention gathered dust in a closet. He couldn't bear to look at them anymore. "You look tired," Mirabelle had told him during one of their increasingly rare meetings at a coffee shop. She'd moved on with her life, her art career blossoming while his soul withered. "I'm fine," Dalton had lied, stirring his coffee absently. "Just busy." "When was the last time you worked on your own project?" The question had stung because he knew the answer. Months, maybe longer. "I've been meaning to get back to it," he'd said, once things settled down at work. Mirabelle had given him a look that said she didn't believe him, but she'd let it go. Their friendship was already strained. She didn't want to push him further away. That evening, Dalton had finally tried to revisit his old designs. He'd pulled out his notebooks, opened his laptop, and stared at the plans he'd once been so passionate about. But when he tried to work on them, his mind went blank. The creativity that had once flowed so easily was gone, replaced by an exhausting emptiness. Then he'd remembered the contract clause he'd never properly examined. With growing dread, Dalton had dug out his copy of the employment agreement and found the section on intellectual property. As he read it carefully for the first time, his stomach had dropped. Any invention, design, or innovation he created, even in his personal time, even unrelated to Meridian's business, belonged to the company for the duration of his employment, plus 10 years after leaving. 10 years. He'd signed away his own mind for a decade. Panicked, Dalton had scheduled a meeting with his supervisor the next day. "There must be some flexibility," he'd argued. "My water purification project has nothing to do with Meridian's products." His supervisor had smiled that corporate smile that never reached the eyes. "The contract is quite clear, Dalton. We invested in you as an innovator. All your innovations belong to us. It's industry standard. But I started this project before I even joined the company, which you failed to disclose during the hiring process. However, we're willing to overlook that. Just focus on your assigned work, and we won't have any problems." Dalton had left that meeting feeling like the walls were closing in. He was trapped. His dream, his purpose, the thing that had defined him, locked away behind legal barriers he'd been too foolish to notice. The months that followed were darker. Dalton started spending money he didn't need to spend. Expensive dinners, gadgets, clothes, trying to fill the hollow feeling inside. His savings dwindled. He stopped calling Mirabelle because he couldn't face her questions. He avoided Sterling entirely, ashamed of how far he'd fallen from the young man his mentor had believed in. His work performance declined. Projects were submitted late. His ideas, when he bothered to share them, were uninspired. Colleagues began avoiding him. His supervisor's friendly demeanor cooled to professional distance. Then came the envelope in his personal mailbox at home. Not cream-colored and elegant like Sterling's letter. This one was official, stamped, threatening. Eviction notice. Final warning. Dalton stared at it in disbelief. How had it gotten this bad? He'd been making good money. Where had it all gone? The answer, of course, was that he'd poured it into a lifestyle meant to distract him from hating his actual life. And now, even that false comfort was crumbling. He had 2 weeks to pay everything he owed or find a new place to live. The new apartment, if it could even be called that, was barely bigger than a storage closet. The paint peeled from the walls. The single window overlooked a brick wall and the radiator clanked ominously through the night. Dalton had moved his belongings in silence, his few remaining possessions fitting into his car in just 2 trips. Everything he'd accumulated over the years, the nice furniture, the electronics, the illusion of success, had been sold off to pay debts. He sat on the thin mattress on the floor and looked around at what his life had become. This was rock bottom. It had to be. His phone rang less and less. People he'd thought were friends had slowly disappeared when he stopped being fun to be around, when he could no longer afford to join them at expensive restaurants or weekend trips. There was one person he desperately wanted to talk to, Sterling. His mentor would know what to say, how to help him find his way back. But when Dalton finally worked up the courage to search for Sterling's contact information, he discovered that his mentor had moved away over a year ago. No forwarding address. No one seemed to know where he'd gone. Another connection severed. Another door closed. On a particularly low evening, Dalton found himself walking through his old neighborhood. He wasn't sure why his feet carried him there. Maybe just nostalgia for simpler times. Or maybe he was torturing himself with memories of what he'd lost. He passed Mirabelle's house, the one where they'd spent countless hours in the garage building their childhood inventions. Light glowed warmly from the windows. He could hear laughter inside, music, the sounds of celebration. Dalton moved closer, staying in the shadows. Through the window, he could see Mirabelle surrounded by people, all holding glasses, congratulating her. A banner hung on the wall. "Congratulations on your gallery opening." She'd done it. Mirabelle had achieved her dream while staying true to herself. Her face glowed with genuine happiness, the kind Dalton hadn't felt in years. He recognized some of the people with her. Artists, community leaders, friends who valued substance over status. People who would never have fit into the world Dalton had tried so desperately to join. For a moment he almost knocked on the door, almost walked in and congratulated her, admitted everything, asked for help. But shame rooted him to the spot. What would he say? How could he face her after pushing her away, after ignoring every warning she'd given him? So he stood there in the cold, watching through the window like a ghost haunting his own past, until he couldn't bear it anymore. Then he turned and walked back to his tiny apartment, feeling more alone than ever. That night, unable to sleep, Dalton began sorting through the box of belongings from his old life. Pictures, awards, newspaper clippings, evidence of who he used to be. At the bottom of the box, wrapped in an old t-shirt, he found the trophy from the National Innovation Prize. He held it up to the dim light. The engraving read, "For innovation that changes lives." A bitter laugh escaped him. What lives had he changed? He couldn't even manage his own. As he placed the trophy back in the box, his hand brushed against something else. Fabric. A jacket he hadn't worn in years. The same jacket he'd worn the night of his victory celebration. And there, in the inside pocket, still waiting after all this time, was Sterling's envelope. Dalton pulled it out with trembling hands. The red wax seal was cracked with age but still intact. His name in Sterling's handwriting looked like an accusation. "Don't open it until you feel truly lost," Sterling had said. "Until you think you've forgotten who you are and why you started this journey." Well, he was there now, completely and utterly lost. Dalton's finger traced the edge of the envelope. This was it, the moment Sterling had somehow known would come. But fear gripped him. What if the letter contained disappointment? What if Sterling had known all along that Dalton would fail? His hands shook as he began to break the seal, but exhaustion overwhelmed him. The letter slipped from his fingers onto the mattress beside him as sleep finally claimed him. Tomorrow. He'd read it tomorrow. Tonight, he simply didn't have the strength to face whatever truth waited inside. Morning light filtered weakly through the single window. Dalton woke with the envelope pressed against his cheek. the wax seal leaving a faint impression on his skin. He sat up slowly, his back aching from the thin mattress. There was no avoiding it now. Whatever Sterling had written 15 years ago, whatever truth had been waiting all this time, today he would finally know. With steady hands this time, Dalton carefully broke the seal. The wax crumbled away, and he unfolded the letter inside. Sterling's precise handwriting filled 2 pages. "Dear Dalton," it began. "If you're reading this, then I was right to worry, and I'm sorry for that." Dalton's throat tightened as he continued reading. "There's something you need to know about the National Innovation Prize you won. Something I've kept from you because I hoped that the lie would serve a greater truth." Dalton's heart began to pound. "You didn't have the winning entry, Dalton. Technically speaking, another competitor's invention was superior. A young man named Von Keller created a water filtration system that was more efficient, more scalable, and more technically impressive than yours." The words blurred. Dalton had to blink several times to continue reading. But here's what Von's invention lacked: heart, purpose, soul. I watched him present his project, and do you know what he talked about? Market potential, profit margins, licensing opportunities. He saw his invention as a ticket to wealth, nothing more. And when you presented your device, you talked about a village you'd read about where children walked miles every day for clean water. You talked about your grandmother who'd gotten sick from contaminated water when she was young. You talked about making a difference, not making money. I was the head judge that year. I had the final say, and I chose you, Dalton. Not because your invention was perfect, but because I saw in you something rare, someone who innovates for the right reasons. I gambled that if given the platform and recognition, you would use them to create real change." Dalton's hand shook as he turned to the second page. "I've broken the rules by choosing you. I've compromised my integrity because I believed in yours. I hope desperately that I was right. I hope that when you read this, if you ever need to read this, you'll have proven that innovation driven by compassion matters more than innovation driven by greed." I've been watching Von Keller's career. He's become exactly what I feared: wealthy, successful, and empty. He creates products that make money but change nothing that matters. Don't become him, Dalton. Don't let whatever brought you to open this letter be the end of your story. Let it be the turning point, the moment you remember why you started. The letter was signed simply, "With hope and faith, Sterling." Dalton read it 3 times, each word hitting him like a physical blow. He hadn't really won. His greatest achievement had been a lie. And worse, he'd wasted the gift Sterling had given him. With shaking fingers, he opened his laptop and searched for Von Keller. The results filled his screen. Von was everywhere: tech magazines, business journals, social media. He was indeed a billionaire now, his company worth billions. His inventions were technically brilliant but served only those who could afford them. Luxury water systems for mansions, high-end purification devices for exclusive resorts. In one interview, Von was asked about making technology accessible to those in need. His response: "Charity doesn't drive innovation. Profit does. If people want clean water, they should work harder to afford it." Dalton felt sick. This was the person who should have won that prize. This was who Sterling had passed over to give him a chance. And what had Dalton done with that chance? Sold out his dreams for a corporate salary. Abandoned his purpose for empty recognition. Become exactly what Sterling had feared, just with less financial success to show for it. He looked around his miserable apartment, at the life he'd built on a foundation of borrowed faith that he'd squandered completely. Sterling had believed in him when he didn't deserve it, had given him an opportunity that wasn't rightfully his, and Dalton had thrown it all away. The weight of that betrayal pressed down on him until he could barely breathe. For 3 days, Dalton barely left his apartment. He couldn't eat, couldn't sleep properly, couldn't stop thinking about Sterling's letter and the truth it contained. On the 4th day, desperate to escape the suffocating walls, he left with no destination in mind. His feet carried him through the city until he found himself standing in front of the public library, a grand old building he'd passed 100 times but never entered. Inside, it was warm and quiet. The smell of old books and furniture polish reminded him of simpler times. Without really thinking, Dalton found himself in the science section, pulling books about innovation and invention from the shelves. He sat at a corner table, surrounded by books he didn't actually read, just staring at the pages while his mind spun in circles. "You've been staring at that same page for 45 minutes. Dalton looked up, startled. An elderly woman stood beside his table, her silver hair pulled back neatly, her eyes sharp and knowing behind wire-rimmed glasses. She wore a volunteer badge that read, "Cleo Winters." "I'm sorry," Dalton mumbled. "I'll leave if I'm bothering anyone." "You're not bothering anyone except yourself," Cleo said, pulling out the chair across from him without asking. "I've seen a lot of people come through this library over the years. I know the difference between someone reading and someone hiding." Dalton wanted to argue, but the words wouldn't come. She was right. "I'm Cleo," she continued. "I volunteer here 3 days a week, retired teacher. I've got nothing but time and a bad habit of noticing people who look lost." "I'm fine," Dalton said automatically. "Of course you are. That's why you're sitting in a public library pretending to read a book about innovation while looking like someone who gave up on innovating years ago." The accuracy of her observation stung. "You don't know anything about me." "True," Cleo agreed pleasantly. "But I know that look. I've worn it myself. 3 times, actually. Each time I thought my life was over. Each time I was wrong." Despite himself, Dalton was curious. "What happened?" "First time, lost my teaching position because I stood up to an unfair policy. Second time, my husband left me after 20 years. Third time, lost my entire retirement savings to a scam." Cleo ticked them off on her fingers like she was listing grocery items. "Each time I thought I'd never recover. Each time I did." "How?" Dalton heard himself ask. "By stopping," Cleo said simply. "By stopping the running, the hiding, the pretending. By sitting still long enough to remember who I actually was underneath all the mistakes and losses." Over the following weeks, Dalton kept returning to the library. At first, he told himself it was just for somewhere warm to spend his days. But truthfully, it was Cleo. She never pried, never pushed, but she was there, making observations that cut through his defenses, sharing stories that somehow related to whatever he was going through. "You read a lot about innovation," she noted one afternoon, "but you never take notes, never sketch anything. You're consuming information without creating anything with it." "I can't create anything," Dalton said bitterly. "Legal reasons." "Ah," Cleo said knowingly. "You signed away your creativity. I did something similar once, promised a school board I'd teach only from their approved curriculum. Killed my spirit for years. How did you get past it?" "Found the loopholes. Found what they couldn't control. Found what was still mine." She leaned forward. "There's always something they can't take from you. You just have to figure out what that is." One day, Cleo mentioned casually, "We have a youth STEM program here on Thursdays. Group of kids trying to prepare for their school science fair. Their regular mentor canceled. They're struggling." Dalton shook his head immediately. "I can't help them. I'm not in a position to mentor anyone." "Didn't ask if you could help," Cleo said mildly. "Just mentioned it. They meet at 4 o'clock, room 3B. Thursday came. Dalton told himself he wouldn't go to room 3B. He'd just read his books and leave like always. But at 3:55, he found his feet carrying him down the hallway. Through the door's window, he could see 6 kids, ranging from maybe 10 to 14 years old, gathered around a table covered with cardboard, wire, and confusion. Before he could talk himself out of it, Dalton pushed open the door. 6 pairs of eyes turned toward him. "Hi," he said awkwardly. "I heard you might need some help with your projects?" A girl with braids and determined eyes spoke up. "Are you an engineer or something?" "I used to be an inventor," Dalton said, the words feeling strange in his mouth. "A long time ago." "Cool," she said. "I'm trying to build a solar-powered phone charger, but I can't figure out the circuit." And just like that, something inside Dalton that had been dormant for years flickered weakly back to life. Working with the kids felt like rediscovering a forgotten language. At first, Dalton's hands fumbled with the wires and circuits. His explanations came out awkward and uncertain, but the kids didn't seem to notice. Or if they did, they didn't care. "That's so smart," one boy exclaimed when Dalton showed him how to stabilize his robot's balance. "How did you think of that?" Dalton shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "Just experience, I guess." But it was more than that. For the first time in years, his mind was actually working on real problems, finding creative solutions, building something that mattered to someone, even if that someone was just a 12-year-old with a science fair project. After the session ended, Dalton walked home feeling lighter than he had in months, maybe even years. That lightness lasted exactly until he reached his apartment and reality crashed back. He was helping kids build school projects while his own life remained a disaster. He was teaching others to innovate while forbidden from innovating himself. The next Thursday, he almost didn't go back to the library. What was the point? These small moments of purpose wouldn't change his actual circumstances. He was still broke, still trapped by a contract, still a failure who'd wasted Sterling's faith in him. But Cleo's words echoed in his mind. There's always something they can't take from you. He went back. Week after week, he showed up for those kids. And week after week, something strange happened. The fog in his mind began to clear. Ideas started forming again, not for himself, but for helping these young inventors solve their problems. Mr. Ashford, the girl with braids, her name was Destiny, approached him after one session. My dad says you won some big award when you were young. Is that true? Dalton's chest tightened. That was a long time ago. What did you invent? He hesitated, then explained his water purification device in simple terms. The kids gathered around, fascinated. That's amazing, Destiny said. Why aren't you still doing that? The question hung in the air. Why wasn't he still doing that? It's complicated, Dalton said finally. My mom says that's what adults say when they've given up. A younger boy chimed in. The words hit harder than they should have. Out of the mouths of children came uncomfortable truths. That night, Dalton couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about his water purification device, about the villages that still needed clean water, about how his invention was gathering dust in his memory while people suffered. He got up and, for the first time in years, pulled out his old notebooks. He flipped through pages of designs and calculations, feeling a painful mix of nostalgia and regret. What if he tried again? What if he built a new version, something small, something that wouldn't violate his contract because it would be different enough, simpler, made for education rather than commercial use? No, that was dangerous thinking. Meridian's lawyers would find a way to claim it. He'd end up in even worse trouble, but the idea wouldn't leave him alone. Over the next few weeks, Dalton found himself sketching in the margins of library books, then quickly erasing the marks. He'd wake up at night with solutions to old problems, then force himself to forget them by morning. His mind was fighting against years of self-imposed shutdown, and the battle was exhausting. Cleo noticed, of course. You're wrestling with something. I can't do what I want to do, Dalton said. I'm legally prohibited from it. So do something adjacent, Cleo suggested. Do something that fits in the cracks they didn't think to seal up. That afternoon, Destiny showed him her completed solar charger. It worked, but barely. The charge was too slow to be practical. What if we used recycled materials to boost the collection area? Dalton said, then stopped himself. That was too close to his own work, too risky. But Destiny's eyes lit up. Like what? And there it was, the loophole. He couldn't build his invention, but he could teach these kids the principles. He could help them create something meaningful. Let me show you, Dalton heard himself say. He helped Destiny redesign her project using techniques from his old work. Then he helped 2 other kids improve their inventions with similar approaches. Nothing that violated his contract. Just teaching, just education, just helping. For the first time since signing that contract, Dalton felt like himself again. At the end of the session, as the kids packed up their projects, Destiny turned to him with a curious expression. Mr. Ashford, if you were so good at inventing, why did you stop? Dalton looked at this bright young girl, at her genuine curiosity and unfiltered honesty, and realized he didn't have a good answer. Not anymore. I don't know, he admitted, but maybe it's time I figured that out. The idea came to Dalton at 3 in the morning. He sat up in bed, his heart racing with an excitement he hadn't felt in years. What if he created an educational model? A miniature water purification system built entirely from recycled materials. Bottles, old filters, basic hardware store supplies. Nothing sophisticated enough to be commercial. Nothing Meridian could claim was marketable technology. Just a teaching tool to demonstrate principles to students. It wouldn't violate his contract because it wasn't an invention meant for production. It was educational materials. Teachers did this kind of thing all the time. For the first time in years, Dalton felt hope. He spent the next 2 weeks working in secret, gathering materials from recycling bins and discount stores. His tiny apartment became a workshop again. He worked late into the nights, refining the design, making it simple enough for students to replicate but effective enough to actually work. The day he finished, his hands were shaking as he tested it. Water went in murky from the tap. He'd added dirt and food coloring to simulate contamination. The system filtered it through layers of sand, gravel, and a basic carbon filter he'd constructed from charred wood and cloth. Clean water came out the other end. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't commercial grade, but it worked, and it could be built by anyone with basic materials and instructions. Dalton felt tears on his cheeks and realized he was crying. When had he last created something meaningful? When had he last felt this sense of purpose? He couldn't wait to show someone. And there was only one person he wanted to share this with. Mirabelle's art studio was in a converted warehouse downtown. Dalton stood outside for 10 minutes, gathering courage, before finally knocking. She opened the door, surprise flashing across her face. "Dalton?" "Hi," he said awkwardly. I know it's been a long time, but I made something and I wanted to show you." Mirabelle studied him for a long moment, and he could see her weighing whether to let him back in, even just a little. Finally, she stepped aside. "Come in." Her studio was beautiful, filled with paintings, sculptures, and the creative energy he remembered from their childhood. He felt a pang of jealousy, not of her success, but of how she'd stayed true to herself while he'd lost his way. "So, what did you make?" she asked, her tone cautious but curious. Dalton unpacked his device and explained it. The recycled materials, the educational purpose, how it demonstrated the principles of water purification without being a commercial product. He talked faster than he had in years, enthusiasm pouring out of him. When he finished, Mirabelle was quiet for a moment. Then slowly she smiled, a real smile, the kind he remembered from when they were kids building things in her garage. "This is you," she said softly. "This is the Dalton I remember. I want to show it to a school," he continued. "I thought maybe that elementary school near where we grew up. Remember? They never had funding for science equipment." "Lincoln Elementary," Mirabelle said, nodding. "They'd love this. Would you come with me to present it?" Mirabelle hesitated, and he could see her internal struggle. He'd hurt her by pushing her away. She had every right to say no. "Okay," she finally said. "Let's do it together." 2 days later, they presented the water purification model to Lincoln Elementary's science teacher, Mrs. Patterson. She was the enthusiastic woman who immediately saw the potential. "This is exactly what we need," she exclaimed, examining the device. "Our students could build this themselves. Learn about science, environmental responsibility, and practical problem-solving all at once. We could develop a whole curriculum around it," Mirabelle added, getting excited. "Art students could design the containers. Science students could understand the purification process. Math students could calculate efficiency ratios." The energy in the room was electric. For the first time in years, Dalton was part of something bigger than himself, something that mattered. Mrs. Patterson agreed to pilot the project with her 5th grade class. Mirabelle offered to help fund the materials. Not a lot, just enough to get started. As they left the school, Mirabelle turned to him. "I'm proud of you, Dalton, for finding your way back." "I'm trying," he said. "I've got a long way to go, but I'm trying." That night, Dalton slept better than he had in months. He dreamed of classrooms full of kids building their own water purifiers, of his educational model spreading to other schools, of making the kind of difference he'd always wanted to make. But when he woke up, there was an envelope slipped under his door. His hands went cold as he picked it up. Official letterhead. Legal firm. Meridian Tech Corporation. He opened it with trembling fingers and read the letter once, then twice, unable to process the words. Cease and desist. Violation of intellectual property agreement. Legal action pending. Surrender all materials and prototypes immediately. Someone had reported him. Someone had told Meridian about his educational water purification model, and they were coming after him with everything they had. The letter outlined everything in cold, legal language. Meridian Tech claimed that Dalton's educational model violated his contract's intellectual property clause. They demanded he surrender all prototypes, cease all related activities, and pay a substantial fine for breach of contract. Dalton read it over and over, his hands shaking. How had they found out? He'd been so careful. It was just an educational tool, not a commercial product. But their lawyers had found a way to claim it anyway. He called Mirabelle immediately. Her voice went from warm to worried in seconds as he explained. "This is my fault," he said, his voice breaking. "I shouldn't have involved you. I shouldn't have—" "Stop," Mirabelle interrupted. "We did something good. We helped kids. That matters. But now I'm going to lose everything again." There was a long pause. "I could help with the legal fees," she offered quietly. "I've been doing well with my art. I could—" "No," Dalton said firmly. "You've already helped too much. Can't drag you down with me." "Dalton—" "I have to go," he said and hung up before she could argue further. Mrs. Patterson called that afternoon. Her voice was apologetic and pained. "I'm so sorry, Dalton. The school received a letter too. We have to cancel the program. The principal is worried about legal liability." Another door closed. Another failure. Over the next few days, Dalton tried to fight back. He called the legal aid office, but they explained that contract disputes like his were civil matters. They couldn't help. He tried to find an affordable lawyer, but the consultation fees alone were more than he could manage. The kids from the library's STEM program noticed something was wrong when he stopped showing up on Thursdays. Destiny's mother actually called him, concerned. "The children are asking about you," she said. "Destiny won't stop talking about your water purifier." "I can't come back," Dalton said, his voice hollow. "I'm sorry, tell them I'm sorry." He stopped going to the library entirely. Couldn't face Cleo. Couldn't face the reminder of what he'd briefly had and lost again. Mirabelle came to his apartment, knocked on the door for 20 minutes. He sat inside, silent, until she finally gave up and left. He was toxic. Everything he touched turned to disaster. The people who cared about him only got hurt. Better to push them all away, protect them from his failures. The fine from Meridian was due in 30 days. Dalton had no way to pay it. They'd probably sue, garnish whatever wages he could earn. He'd be paying for this mistake for years, maybe decades. He spent days lying on his mattress, staring at the ceiling, replaying every wrong choice he'd ever made. The contract he'd signed without reading carefully. The dreams he'd abandoned. The people he'd disappointed. Sterling's faith that he'd completely betrayed. At his lowest point, Dalton pulled out Sterling's letter again and read it one more time. The words that had once sparked hope now felt like accusations. "I believed in you," Sterling had written, and Dalton had proven that belief was misplaced. Late one night, there was a knock at his door. Dalton ignored it. Probably Mirabelle again, or maybe Cleo. He couldn't face them. But the knocking continued, patient and persistent. "Dalton," a familiar voice called through the door. "I know you're in there, and I know you're going through something difficult, but I didn't come all this way to talk to a closed door." Dalton's heart stopped. That voice. He knew that voice. He stumbled to the door and opened it, barely believing what he was seeing. Sterling stood in the hallway, older than Dalton remembered, leaner, with more gray in his hair. But his eyes held the same kindness, the same knowing look. "Hello, Dalton," Sterling said gently. "I think it's time we had a conversation." Dalton couldn't speak. Emotions crashed over him. Shame, relief, guilt, hope, despair, all at once. His mentor, the man whose faith he'd betrayed, was standing right in front of him. "How did you—" Dalton managed. "I've always known where you were," Sterling said. "I've been waiting, watching from a distance, waiting for the right moment." He glanced at the miserable apartment, the legal papers scattered on the floor. "And I think that moment is now. May I come in?" Dalton stepped aside, unable to do anything but nod. Sterling entered and took in the scene, the bare apartment, the defeat in Dalton's posture, the surrender in his eyes. He nodded slowly as if confirming something he'd already known. "You read my letter," Sterling said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," Dalton whispered. "And you finally hit the bottom I knew was coming." Dalton's eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. You gave me everything and I wasted it all. I became exactly what you were afraid I'd become." "No," Sterling said firmly. You became what you needed to become to finally understand what matters. Now sit down. We have a lot to discuss. Sterling settled into the only chair in the apartment while Dalton sat on the edge of his mattress. For a long moment, neither spoke. "You've been watching me?" Dalton finally asked. "Not constantly," Sterling admitted, "but I've kept track. Through mutual acquaintances, occasional check-ins with people in your life. I knew about Meridian Tech. I knew about the contract. I knew about the apartment, the struggles, all of it. And you didn't help? You just watched me fall apart?" Sterling's expression was compassionate but firm. "Would you have listened if I'd come earlier? When you first signed that contract? When you were still chasing recognition and money?" Dalton thought about who he'd been then. Arrogant, defensive, certain he knew better than everyone else. "No," he admitted. "I wouldn't have." "Some lessons can only be learned through experience," Sterling said. "Some people like you and me, need to lose everything before we remember what truly matters." "I ruined everything you gave me," Dalton said, his voice breaking. "That prize, that opportunity, I threw it away." "Did you?" Sterling leaned forward. "Tell me about the educational water purifier, the one you made from recycled materials." Dalton blinked in surprise. "How do you know about that?" "Cleo is an old friend of mine," Sterling said with a slight smile. "I asked her to keep an eye on you. She called me when she saw you starting to find your way back." "Cleo knows you?" The pieces started clicking together. You planned this?" "I suggested she volunteer at the library when I heard you'd been spotted there," Sterling admitted. "But everything else, the mentoring, the breakthrough, the creation, that was all you, Dalton. That was the person I always believed you could be." Dalton shook his head. "But it's over now. Meridian is suing me. They're taking everything." "They're taking what?" Sterling asked. "You have almost nothing left to take. That's actually given you something precious, freedom." "Freedom. I'm about to be buried in legal debt." Sterling stood and walked to the window, looking out at the gray city. "I want to tell you something I've never told anyone. When I chose you over Vaughn Keller for that prize, I didn't just bend the rules. I broke them completely. The other judges found out years later. I was forced to resign from my position. Lost my reputation in the academic community. Had to leave town." Dalton felt like he'd been punched. "Because of me?" "Because of my choice," Sterling corrected. "A choice I've never regretted. Because you know what I learned from that experience? That titles and positions and reputations, they're all secondary to living according to your values. I lost everything I thought defined me, and I found out I was more myself without it." He turned back to Dalton. "I'm telling you this because I can solve your legal problem. I have the money to pay your fine, to buy you out of that contract completely. I can write a check right now that would free you from Meridian forever." Hope flared in Dalton's chest. "You would do that?" "Yes, but I need you to understand something first." Sterling's gaze was intense. "If I do this, it won't mean anything unless you've truly changed. Unless you've learned what this journey was meant to teach you." "I have changed," Dalton said desperately. "I understand now. I know what matters." "Do you?" Sterling challenged. "Because here's the condition. If I pay your fine and free you from that contract, you can never, and I mean never, create something for recognition, for money, or for fame again. Every invention, every design, every innovation you make for the rest of your life must be in service of helping others. No corporate positions, no patents sold to the highest bidder, no compromises." Dalton opened his mouth to agree immediately, but Sterling held up his hand. "Don't answer yet. Really think about it. You'll still need to earn a living. You'll probably never be wealthy. You'll work regular jobs to pay your bills and create in your spare time. You'll help people who can't pay you back. You'll see others get rich and famous off ideas not half as good as yours. Can you live with that? Truly?" The question hung in the air. This was it, the real choice. Not the choice he'd made at 24 when he signed the Meridian contract, but the choice of who he would be going forward. Dalton thought about the kids at the library, their faces lighting up when they solved problems. He thought about Mrs. Patterson's enthusiasm for the educational model. He thought about Destiny, asking why he'd stopped inventing. He thought about Mirabelle, who'd stayed true to herself and found genuine happiness. "I don't need to think about it," Dalton said quietly. "I know my answer." Sterling waited. "I don't want your money," Dalton said, and watched Sterling's eyes widen in surprise. "I need to fix this myself, the right way. If you bail me out, I'll always wonder if I really changed or if I just found another shortcut." For the first time in their entire conversation, Sterling smiled. A genuine, proud smile. "That's the answer I was hoping for. But I don't know how to fix this," Dalton admitted. "I don't have the money. I don't have legal knowledge. I don't know what to do." "Then we figure it out together," Sterling said. "Not with money. With creativity, persistence, and integrity. The same things that made you a real inventor in the first place." The next morning, Dalton woke with renewed purpose. Sterling had spent the night, refusing to stay in a hotel when, as he put it, "we have work to do." They sat at Dalton's small table with coffee and the cease and desist letter spread between them. "First things first," Sterling said. "We need income. What skills do you have that can earn money honestly?" Dalton thought. "I'm good with my hands. I understand electronics, basic construction, problem solving. Then let's find you work that uses those skills." By afternoon, Dalton had applied to 3 places: a hardware store, an electronics repair shop, and a community center that needed a maintenance assistant. By the end of the week, the hardware store called back. The pay was modest, but it was honest work. "Perfect," Sterling said. "Now, the legal problem." Together, they spent evenings at the library, the real library, not just Cleo's corner, researching contract law and intellectual property rights. Dalton learned about fair use, educational exemptions, and contractual overreach. "Your educational model might actually be protected," Sterling explained, showing him a legal precedent. "Teachers create educational materials all the time without being sued. The key is proving it has no commercial application. But Meridian's lawyers are counting on you being too intimidated or too broke to fight back," Sterling finished. "They send these letters to scare people into compliance. Most people fold. I can't afford a lawyer to fight them." "No, but you can represent yourself in small claims court if they actually sue. And there are legal aid clinics that offer free consultations. Let me make some calls." Slowly, step by step, they built a defense strategy. It wasn't fancy or expensive. It was careful, thorough, and grounded in research. Meanwhile, Dalton returned to the library on Thursday afternoon. The STEM kids were there, looking disappointed and confused. "Mr. Ashford!" Destiny jumped up when she saw him. "You came back." "I'm sorry I disappeared," Dalton said, his voice thick with emotion. "I had some problems to deal with. But I'm here now, and I want to keep helping if you'll still have me." The kids surrounded him, all talking at once about their projects and their struggles. For the next 2 hours, Dalton worked with them, teaching and encouraging, feeling more fulfilled than he'd felt during any day at Meridian Tech. Cleo watched from across the room, her eyes meeting Sterling's. They both nodded in satisfaction. After the session, Dalton approached Cleo. "I know you knew Sterling all along." "Guilty," she admitted without shame. "But everything I told you was true. I did fail 3 times. I did learn those lessons. Sterling just asked me to be there when you needed someone." "Thank you," Dalton said simply, "for caring enough to help a stranger." "You're not a stranger anymore," Cleo replied. "You're family now." The next difficult step was Mirabelle. Dalton called her and asked to meet at the coffee shop where they used to spend hours talking as teenagers. She arrived cautiously, and they sat across from each other in uncomfortable silence before Dalton spoke. "I'm sorry. For everything. For the years I pushed you away. For involving you in something that caused you stress. For being a terrible friend." Mirabelle stirred her coffee, considering. "You hurt me, Dalton, multiple times. I know. But I also saw you trying to change. I saw you creating something meaningful again, even if it caused problems." She looked up at him. "Are you really back this time? Or is this just another phase before you disappoint me again?" The question was fair. Painful, but fair. "I can't promise I won't make mistakes," Dalton said honestly. "But I can promise I'm done chasing the wrong things. I'm done pretending to be someone I'm not. I've got a job at a hardware store. I'm fighting this legal battle the right way. I'm helping kids at the library. It's not glamorous, but it's real. It's me." Mirabelle studied his face for a long moment, then slowly smiled. "Okay, let's start over. Slowly." "Slowly," Dalton agreed. feeling a weight lift from his chest. At his hardware store job, Dalton discovered something unexpected. He was good at it, helping customers solve problems, explaining how things worked, suggesting creative solutions. His boss noticed. "You've got a real knack for this," Mr. Harrison said. "Ever thought about teaching? We do workshops here sometimes for DIY enthusiasts." "Actually," Dalton said, an idea forming, "I'd love to." He started teaching Saturday workshops at the hardware store. Basic home repairs, creative problem solving with everyday materials, sustainability projects. Nothing that violated his contract, just sharing knowledge and helping people. The workshops grew popular. People started bringing their kids. Dalton found himself mentoring a new generation of thinkers and creators, just like Sterling had mentored him. 3 months after Sterling's arrival, they received notice that Meridian Tech was indeed moving forward with their lawsuit. But Dalton was ready now. He had documentation, precedents, and most importantly, the courage to stand up for himself. "Whatever happens," Sterling said the night before the first hearing, "you've already won something more valuable than this case. You've found yourself again." Dalton looked at his mentor, this man who'd never given up on him, and felt gratitude beyond words. "I won't let you down," he said. "You never did," Sterling replied. "You just took a longer route to get where you needed to be." The morning of the preliminary hearing, Dalton stood in front of his bathroom mirror, adjusting the tie Mirabelle had helped him pick out. It wasn't expensive, but it was respectable. He looked at his reflection, no longer the defeated man from months ago, but not yet the person he hoped to become. Somewhere in between, growing. Sterling met him outside the courthouse. "Remember, this is just a preliminary hearing. The judge will decide if there's enough merit for a full trial. And if there is, then we keep fighting, one step at a time." Inside the courtroom, Meridian Tech's lawyer was exactly what Dalton expected. Expensive suit, confident demeanor, briefcase full of documents meant to intimidate. Dalton had a folder of printed research and his own determination. The judge, a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes, listened to both sides present their cases. Meridian's lawyer argued that Dalton's educational model violated the intellectual property clause of his contract. Mr. Ashford's device, regardless of its stated purpose, utilizes proprietary concepts he developed while under Meridian Tech's employment. When it was Dalton's turn, his hands shook as he stood, but his voice was steady. "Your Honor, I created this educational model using only public knowledge and recycled materials. It's designed for classroom use, with no commercial application. Teachers across the country create similar educational tools without corporate interference. I'm asking for the same freedom to educate and inspire that any teacher has." He presented his research, the educational precedents, the documentation showing his model was significantly different from any work he'd done at Meridian. The judge examined the materials carefully, asked pointed questions, and finally announced she would review the case and issue a decision within 2 weeks. As they left the courthouse, Sterling put a hand on Dalton's shoulder. "You did well. Now we wait." But waiting wasn't passive this time. Dalton continued working at the hardware store, continued his Thursday sessions with the STEM kids, continued his Saturday workshops. Life went on, meaningful and full, regardless of what the court decided. Then, 5 days after the hearing, something unexpected happened. Dalton received an email from an unfamiliar address. The subject line read, "A proposition worth considering." He opened it cautiously. "Mr. Ashford, my name is Vaughn Keller. You may remember me from years ago. We competed in the same innovation competition. I've been following your recent legal troubles with interest, and I'd like to meet with you to discuss a mutually beneficial arrangement. I believe we can help each other. Please call at your earliest convenience." Dalton's heart sank. Vaughn Keller, the man who should have won that prize, the billionaire who represented everything Dalton had almost become. He showed the email to Sterling that evening. "Interesting timing," Sterling observed. "Right before the judge's decision, when you're most vulnerable to temptation. What could he possibly want with me? Only one way to find out. But Dalton," Sterling's eyes were serious, "this is going to be a test. Maybe the biggest one you've faced. Be very careful." The meeting was set for the following afternoon at an upscale hotel restaurant. Vaughn Keller was already seated when Dalton arrived, looking every bit the successful entrepreneur. Tailored suit, expensive watch, the casual confidence of someone used to getting what they wanted. "Dalton Ashford," Vaughn said, standing to shake his hand. "Thank you for coming. Please sit." They ordered coffee. Vaughn made small talk about the weather, the city, nothing of substance. Then he leaned forward. "I'm going to be direct. I need someone with your creative mind and your current, let's call it desperation. My company is expanding into new markets, and I need innovative thinkers who can develop products quickly without getting caught up in ethical hand-wringing." Dalton felt his stomach turn. "Ethical hand-wringing? Come on," Vaughn said with a dismissive wave. "We both know the world runs on profit, not sentiment. I've built an empire by understanding that. You could have done the same if you hadn't gotten sidetracked with this education nonsense." "That education nonsense is helping kids learn," Dalton said, his voice tight. "And what's it getting you? Legal trouble and poverty. Meanwhile, I'm offering you a 6-figure salary, full legal support to resolve your Meridian situation, and the resources to actually make an impact at scale." Vaughn slid a folder across the table. "Contract terms, very generous. All you have to do is work exclusively on projects that maximize profit potential." Dalton opened the folder. The salary made his breath catch. More than he'd ever made, even at Meridian. Enough to solve every financial problem he had. Enough to never worry about money again. "There's just one condition," Vaughn continued. "You stop with the humanitarian projects. No more teaching, no more educational tools, no more giving away your expertise for free. You work for me, and only for me, creating products for people who can actually afford to pay premium prices." Dalton looked at the contract, then at Vaughn, then at the contract again. Everything he'd wanted at 24 was right here. Success, security, recognition. All he had to do was compromise, again, on what mattered most. "Can I think about it?" Dalton heard himself ask. "Of course, but I need an answer by tomorrow morning. The offer expires then." Dalton didn't sleep that night. The contract sat on his table, practically glowing in the darkness. 6 figures. Legal protection. Everything solved with one signature. He thought about his tiny apartment, his modest hardware store salary, the uncertain legal battle. Then he thought about Destiny's face when she got her solar charger working. About the Saturday workshop attendees who thanked him for teaching them. About Sterling's quiet pride. About Mirabelle's cautious trust. At dawn, he picked up his phone. "Mr. Keller, I have my answer." That afternoon, Dalton sat in the courtroom again. The judge had called an emergency session. Meridian Tech had dropped their lawsuit entirely. No explanation, just a complete withdrawal. Dalton was free. Sterling was waiting outside. Vaughn called them off, didn't he? Probably promised them something in exchange for dropping the case if you agreed to work for him. "Probably," Dalton agreed. "But it doesn't matter. I turned him down." Sterling's face broke into the widest smile Dalton had ever seen. "Tell me what you said." "I told him I'd rather be poor and purposeful than rich and empty. I told him I'd made that mistake once and wouldn't make it again." Dalton laughed, feeling lighter than air. "He called me a fool." "The best kind of fool," Sterling said, pulling him into an embrace. "The kind who knows what really matters." 3 months later, Dalton stood in the community center's multi-purpose room, watching as it filled with people. Not hundreds, just a few dozen, but they mattered. An international education foundation had reached out after hearing about his work from Mrs. Patterson and the library kids. They weren't offering millions. They were offering something better. A platform to train teachers worldwide in creating accessible science education tools. Mirabelle stood beside him, having designed beautiful instructional materials for the program. Cleo was there, beaming proudly. The STEM kids sat in the front row, Destiny holding a trophy she'd won at the science fair using principles Dalton taught her. And Sterling, frailer now but radiant with joy, sat in a place of honor. 15 years ago, Dalton began his presentation. "I won a prize I didn't deserve, but the man who gave it to me saw something I couldn't see yet, that the real prize isn't recognition or money, it's impact." He demonstrated his educational water purifier, then invited the kids to help. They worked together, laughing and teaching, showing how simple materials could create something meaningful. After the presentation, a young woman approached. "Mr. Ashford?" I'm a teacher from a rural school. What you showed today, it could change how my students see science. Could you teach me? Dalton felt tears prick his eyes. Not from cameras or applause, but from genuine connection. I'd be honored. As the crowd dispersed, Sterling approached. You proved me right, Dalton. Finally. I took the long way. The only way that mattered. Sterling squeezed his shoulder. The journey was the prize all along. Dalton looked around at his small community. Not famous, not wealthy, but rich in purpose. He'd lost everything chasing the wrong dream. But in losing it all, he'd found what he was really meant to do. Success wasn't measured in applause or bank accounts. It was measured in the quiet moment when someone said, "You changed my life today." And that was the truest prize of all.